Welcome back to New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. If this happens, you'll pay a very heavy price indeed. We've got that story postponing pandemic meetings. But first, on this episode 402 of New World Next Week, no, 403. Time flies, James. Pakistan, China, and Russia decide to conduct trade in local currencies, skipping dollars. The 8-member countries of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, something we've talked about before, but maybe not in a little while, the SCO, including China, Russia, and Pakistan, have made the principal decision to conduct bilateral trade and investment and issue bonds in local and national currencies instead of U.S. dollars. As per details, a roadmap was to be signed and finalized at the SCO finance ministers meeting in Moscow back on March 18th. I could not find an update or link for that, James. I'll defer to you on that one. Russia, as chairman of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, called for suggestions from all member states for trade and investment ideas in local currencies. Representatives from the finance ministries and central banks of China, India, Russia, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan were all to attend this sort of final conference in Moscow. In addition to that, Iran, Afghanistan, Belarus, and Mongolia are observer countries who basically want to join the frat, James, but I think they have to go through more hazing. So again, we're not specifically about coronavirus, but everything is just sort of under that kind of dark umbrella, James. So back to the SCO.
Indeed. So, you're right. I was looking for updates to this story and something that's being reported after this meeting took place. I'm glad you found this story because I think it's important. But yeah, I was looking for updates to it. The only thing I could find was something from a website called Tarifa, which I take to be a Rwandan news site. And I don't know how seriously to take this article. It's Russia-China plot against US dollar and pound. And in it, they have a quote from John Roberts, the US Chief Justice, argues that all these things that they're doing will do little decisively to end the domination of the West and the hegemony of the United States in particular. Quote, major players should go over to a gold or silver-backed non-fiat currency and displace the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency and preferred primary currency for international trade, and their international financial institutions have carry the same clout as the IMF World Bank BIS, Roberts says. I don't know where they're getting that quote. It doesn't sound real. And then they immediately go on to quote a commentator only identifying himself as Matthew. So again, I don't know what this story is, but that is literally the only follow-up I could find in English about this meeting that took place. I did, of course, check the Shanghai Cooperation Organization English website, and they don't have any communique or any sort of post up about this meeting. If anyone speaks Chinese or Russian or any of the other languages in which they might have more up-to-date information, please go check that out and see if you can find anything else and report back to headquarters. But anyway, the larger point here that these countries are looking to trade in national currencies and settle in national currencies rather than going through the dollar is, of course, not surprising. If in fact, it's really just the continuation of a trend that we've been seeing for a number of years, and China has been making bilateral deals out the yin-yang, if you'll forgive the expression, precisely around this, always settling in local currencies. So this is, again, just a natural extension of what's been going on for a long time. And I have said for a long time that the process of, yes, the US dollar as world reserve currency, that system is coming to an end, but it can't just collapse overnight because there has to be something there that people can use that will be the backstop. And that something doesn't exist yet. But now that everything is on the table, and now that the entire world has changed forever and we're in the new normal, this is the time where we are going to see spectacular things happening. And I don't necessarily mean that in a positive sense, but spectacular, unthinkable things will be happening in the economic and in the monetary sense. And so I am going to be writing about this in more detail this weekend. I'm going to be writing about the global reset. It is happening right now. And people have been using that term for years now in conjunction with a monetary reset in particular. And I think that does apply to that. And this story is just one sliver of a window of an example into that. But it's part of a broader reset that's happening right now. So yes, I think the US dollar is as the world reserve hegemon is coming to an end, but what exactly is being formed to replace it remains to be seen in its details anyway, and we'll be here documenting that for you, I'm sure, week in and week out. But this is just, I think, the beginning of a trend. And let's tie all of this craziness into also the oil price drop that's happened recently and the oil wars that are going on right now with Saudi Arabia and Russia, that in itself may be one more window into this story and the end of the petrodollar system, which some people have said basically has already happened or is in the process of happening. Crazy times. But one thing can be taken for certain, and that's that the post-World War II Bretton Woods system, to the extent that we still operate on it in this petrodollar system, that is coming to an end. No doubt about it. It's only a question of how long it takes to get to the next system.
Well, and like you kind of said, all options are on the table, and you and I were kind of joking before we started taping here. All the people kind of seem like conspiracy theorists now. It again is that new kind of strange new normal, and all the different grand chessboards and all the 5D levels of chess. Again, lots of moves being made on multiple different levels. The Rwandan news site, that does sound like a bunch of rich creamery butter. It would be, I mean, I would think, wildly inappropriate for someone like John Roberts to speak on monetary issues of such a level. It would kind of seem someone like Mnuchin to be like, hey, that's supposed to be my gig. So another area that we move to, again, just sort of under the shadow of the new normal, Trump warns heavy price if Iran attacks U.S. in Iraq. Donald Trump, the Swamp Thing, warned Iran on today, Wednesday, April Fool's, no fooling, as we tape this episode for you. He tweeted today, against attacking U.S. troops or assets in Iraq, saying the Islamic Republic would pay a heavy price for such a move. Quote, upon information and belief, Iran or its proxies are planning a sneak attack on U.S. troops and or assets in Iraq. If this happens, Iran will pay a very heavy price indeed, end quote, he said, of course, without providing more details. Trump's tweet came as the Wall Street Journal reported he is set to meet this Friday, April 3rd, with the heads of some of the largest U.S. oil companies to discuss government measures to help them, of course, weather the unprecedented oil crash that you just mentioned, James. Among those expected to attend are the CEOs, and those are the ones that haven't resigned recently, of Exxon and Chevron that we know about. James?
Yeah, interesting. Interesting how this article links those two things, because, obviously. But, yeah, this is interesting. It beggars the imagination that the United States will be ramping up some sort of military action in the Middle East in the midst of all this craziness. Surely this is just political blather. Surely this is just meant as a political distraction? Question mark? Hopefully, but maybe not. Again, everything is on the table, and perhaps, now that everyone's locked up in their homes and you can't do nothing about it, perhaps this is the excuse for carte blanche for the neocons that infest the Trump administration to have their way. I don't know. I don't know which way this is trending, but obviously what is being set right now is the narrative that will be essentially allow the U.S. government to act in whatever way it wants, in, of course, preemptively against these Iranian militias in Iraq that keep attacking us, so that the next time, inevitably, one of these rocket attacks happens, again, no matter where it happens or how it happens or who ultimately is responsible for it, it will be, the narrative has been set, the excuse is there, that will be the essentially the green light for further military action in Iraq that will spill over into Iran. It's a possibility, and as ridiculous as that sounds in the midst of all this other craziness and all sorts of things being canceled and aircraft carriers being taken out of commission because of coronavirus and things like this, you wouldn't think that this would be possible to push. But then again, there's a lot of things you wouldn't think would be possible that are suddenly possible. So definitely this is worth keeping our eyes on while everyone's running around screaming their heads off about the virus. This is a good chance for the neocons to start to push their agenda even harder. And they've, as I say, this is the setting of the narrative. So the trap has been set. And now, again, regardless of who does what or whatever kind of incident, they've got the excuse there to go in guns blazing. So it's a worrying development.
Well, and the Western war machine really does love to brag about sort of the full spectrum dominance of, whether or not they can knock over 7 countries in 5 years and have all kinds of places occupied. They might want to take it on just as some sort of diabolical challenge, I suppose. James, if there's maybe some sort of connecting thread between all of these stories that we've talked about and are about to talk about here, that in some ways it's, again, these meetings or these threats that we hear the beginnings of, but then possibly because of coronavirus and other situations, there's no update and we don't actually know. Our third and final segment here on New World Next Week, episode 403, we do actually know that COP26 has been postponed. I got it originally from What's Up With That. And again, of course, everything we say on these episodes always down in your show notes. The COP26 UN Climate Change Conference, James, I had to look up what COP actually stands for. Conference of the Parties. The UN Climate Change Conference, set to take place in Glasgow in November, has been postponed due to COVID-19. Decisions been taken by the COP Bureau with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change with the UK and its Italian partners. Dates for a rescheduled conference in 2021, hosted by in Glasgow, by the UK partnership with Italy, will be set out in due course following further discussion with parties. In light of the ongoing worldwide effects of COVID-19, holding an ambitious, inclusive COP26 in November 2020 is no longer possible, and that is coming from the horse's mouth. Now, James, I was actually I don't do it a lot, but I was on a show last night, Titus Frost, and it had Jason Burmis, it had Nathan from Lifting the Veil, Rachel Tobias, folks whose work I'm familiar with and or admire and had never actually sort of met before. And I didn't know this. One of the numerous things he's been busting out recently in all of his tireless work, Bilderberg 2020 has apparently been canceled, of course, due to coronavirus. I can include a link as well to wikispooks.com, who does, of course, note it was in Switzerland last year, so that means it should have been in North America this year. But again, much like that SCO meeting, I couldn't confirm a lot of things have been postponed, at least publicly. So here's the interesting bits. Speaking of meetings with oil and gas giants and the climate control gang, these meetings, again, are all being postponed, at least publicly. Interesting thing down here in New Mexico, and of course lots of other areas like it around North America, there's a lot of tribal lands, which actually don't have to follow all those pesky guidelines. They are a great place for sneaky meetings that may have been postponed publicly, at least. And that might be going on in any number of places. And it might not be the Bilderberg group coming to your town. It might just be of, some other horrible police state corruption regime who, again, is using the opportunity of the pandemic to move forward on whatever game plans they wanted to move forward on. James, I've got a couple other interesting updates, but I want to hear your thoughts on Bilderberg.
Well, as I've pointed out in the last few years, the importance of the Bilderberg meeting as a physical meeting that is taking place amongst physical people in physical space is, at the very least, outdated as a concept. And we do know that they do have teleconferencing abilities in the meeting room. We do have the footage that came out from, 2016 or whatever, of the meeting room with the teleconference thing set up right in the middle of the room. Of course, they can teleconference in whoever they want so that he's never on the member list or on the, no one gets the photo of him going into the hotel, but he can be addressing it. So it literally, who knows whoever even shows up at these meetings virtually. Well, at any rate, whether or not there is going to be a physical meeting that does sneakily take place on some reservation or not, it seems irrelevant at this point. They can, and do, I'm sure, conspire virtually at all and any times, anytime they want. So I don't know if the importance of the Bilderberg meeting in that sense as a physical meeting space is all that important anymore, at least for their purposes. The Conference of the Parties cancellation I find interesting, if only symbolically, for what it represents. Because I think, just as I pointed out a couple of weeks ago, coronavirus and climate change, I think this may be a much better way to bring in the exact same agenda as the old, climate change thing it's been spinning its wheels. COP26. They've had 26 of these Conference of the Parties, and they still can't get any sort of agreement, or, we need this global Green New Deal. Yeah, they can talk about it till they're blue in the face, but it's never going to happen. And then coronavirus comes along. Let's lock down the entire world. Let's stop all economic activity. Let's start putting in checkpoints and stopping cars from going on the streets and all of this. Hey, you got your global Green New Deal right away, and you didn't have to push any of that climate change nonsense. So, again, I don't think this means they're never going to push this or they're going to completely drop it, but at any rate, it's not so important in the context of what's happening if, assuming that the whole point of this was to stop productive human activity. Well, that's just been accomplished. So, interesting. It's very interesting to see that that cancellation. Perhaps this is a changing of the guard, and the climate change push, as we have known it, will be of less importance. It will be less pushed than the new virus push, which is going to be the new paradigm.
Man, you kind of crystallized it there for me. What a perfect kind of zeitgeisty of the now thing that even the Bilderberg meeting, of course, has to go to just using Zoom or, some public meeting software, and they'll just do it at home like the kids who are sitting at home doing, Google Classroom at this point.
Yeah, and on that note, can I just interject? Yeah, I think it's very funny because, as I've noted recently, I'm actually watching MSM News for the first time in a decade and a half. I find it funny. The MSM News is looking more and more like New World Next Week. It's more and more reporters just sitting there in their apartment or in their home reporting from, it's like, hey, we kind of pioneered that. We're ahead of you guys, as always.
Well, and that's the coronavirus fits the bill, like the Club of Rome talked about, even better than the boogeyman of again. There are a lot of environmental crises, but the ones they've been giving to people, of course, aren't the real ones. I keep waiting for Greta to talk about China or GMOs, but nothing happens yet. James, some other kind of interesting related notes to, of course, the all-encompassing new normal of everything, the coronavirus. I mean, it's become most of my morning shows every morning because there's a world news angle, a technology angle, a health angle, some weird occult angle, and of course, all your news celebs angle. Each and every day, it's pretty much packed full. Had some interesting ones, even just today, to kind of maybe grab folks and pull them over to the Morning Monarchy. Doctors hoarding unproven coronavirus meds. That would, of course, be the controversial Chloroquine. They are apparently writing prescriptions for themselves and their families. Meanwhile, another interesting bit of possible sort of foreknowledge for something. Tabletop drill of virus response aided South Korea when the real thing hit. And, of course, here it comes. Immunity passports for key workers could speed up UK's return to work. And finally, James, just want to include the old 2001 Dark Winter bioterror simulation videos. I uploaded them nearly a decade ago. They seem to be, as a lot of other folks are going to say, and it seems like all roads in a way lead to Dark Winter as far as the multiple scenarios kind of rolling out. Having said all that, James, again, I do broadcast essentially 8 hours a day. I've got a new news show every morning. I do a new music show every afternoon. And I basically run it, and I've mentioned it before, in something called Discord. It's basically a gamer's platform. And in this strange new world, you're able to use lots of different platforms for maybe not the thing it was intended for. So I actually do a chat stream within Discord, and I'd like to just actually invite folks to come check it out. I'm going to put the link in the show notes that essentially gives them sort of a free guest pass, as it were. It's discord.io/Media Monarchy, James, and it's all my news, music, memes, and more, as I like to say.
Let me make a note. I mentioned Dark Winter recently on the podcast, and I think in passing I said it was an anthrax simulation. It was not. It was smallpox that they were simulating out, so I want to make that correction. But it's still highly relevant to the anthrax attacks that then took place a few months later that they blamed on Iraq, exactly as they blamed anthrax on Iraq. Anyway, but on that note, I also did find out some interesting nuggets that directly connect Dark Winter into Event 201, so I should flesh that out in more detail in the future, so stay tuned for that. I also want to make the note that obviously we, as you say, every story relates somehow to this main story, this new paradigm that's taking shape. So, and I can attest to that because I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles that I'm trying to review every single day, and I'm getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails every single day with tips and videos and links. It's great, but I wish I had 1,000 clones. Unfortunately, I do not. I can't do this myself. James can't do this. Can't do this himself. I can't even speak properly myself. So we do rely on you guys out there to help process and collate and discuss this data. I know your Media Monarchy community discusses this in the chat, and you have different forums set up for people to communicate different things. I have the Corbett Report comment section where people are passing information. Please keep that up, and please keep this information circulating amongst yourselves, because we can only do so much, and we need you guys out there to participate in that. So thank you all for doing that, and for sharing stories, and for sharing this information. On that note, we're going to be back doing it again next week. James, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, buddy. Take care.